When kids have a bad initial experience, how do you help them overcome the anxiety they feel when that same scenario pops up again? An imperfect first experience can often lead to a refusal to try again in their house.
Yeah, this is actually a great question. And I think a lot of parents will relate to it. It's broad enough that a lot of parents might relate to it from a whole bunch of different situations, right? Like this could be first day of school, or it could be first time tasting new food, or it could be watching a film, or really, having a play date, or like so many different things. But we can actually make use of some knowledge that we have around how fears are learned and how they're maintained. And one thing that we know is that context matters a lot. So I would say think about all of the different variables and what can we change within them. So for example, can we change the location? Can we try a similar experience but in a different location? And to you, from the outside, it may seem like, yeah, but what does it matter? I mean, it's kind of the same thing. But to your child, it actually may matter a lot. Or who are the people involved? Sometimes you really want your child to do something with you, but you can split that apart. There's actually two things in there. There's do something and there's with you. And what they don't want to do with you right now because that experience was difficult, maybe they'll be willing to try with someone else, maybe with an uncle or a neighbor or a friend's parent or something like that. So think about all those different variables and adjust them. Also, don't rush. I know that we say, get right back on the horse. But sometimes when you've just fell off a horse, you want to take a day before you get right back on. And I'm not suggesting, long-term avoidance, but I am saying let your child set the pace a little bit. Ask them what would make it easier for them. Sometimes, it's almost obvious, but yet we forget sometimes to just ask the kid. Okay, that was really not so great. If we wanted to do this again, what would make it better for you? What would be a good change to do? And finally, I would say not to underestimate the power of incentives and rewards as well. Motivation can matter too. And so there are times when saying, you know what, we're going to do this and then we're going to get some ice cream together is actually going to make a difference to their child. So I would think about all of those different things, and hopefully that'll be helpful to the person who asked the question.
Okay, so here's another question. They mentioned that there are what some people might call more minor things, like refusing to play a game because they're worried that they won't do well or win. What sorts of advice would you give to that parent? Is it something to even, should they address it? Should they ignore it?
Right. Well, it's tricky because my answer might vary a little bit by age, and what's very expected at one age might be an indicator of a slightly bigger issue in another age. But for those kinds of things, like my child is so afraid of losing, or my child is so afraid of making a mistake, for example, before I say anything about what to do with the child, what I like to do is ask the parent, what are they modeling on themselves? Because we can preach one thing and yet sometimes practice another. Do I show in my own behavior about myself that I think it's okay to not win? That I think it's okay to mess up sometimes? That it's okay to make a mistake? If my child sees me stressing out in a perfectionistic way, they're not going to buy it when I say, just do your best and we are proud regardless, right? They're going to roll their eyes. Whether you see them rolling their eyes or not, they're going to think, no, not really, right? Really, I have to be perfect. If you have a fit because there's a tiny stain on your shirt and you won't leave the house because, oh my God, I look like a fool, then you're teaching your child something about how to perceive other people's judgment. And the same goes for, losing a game. With all of that being said, a lot of this is normal behavior in kids, especially at younger ages. And I would say not to excessively go to the this kid has to win every time. Like sometimes the whole family organizes around this whole principle that this child can never lose. And that's partly because we just want to enjoy playing, and this kid's going to flip over the board if we don't do it that way. And so, like, you know what, it's kind of like whatever, we'll just do it. I wouldn't go excessively in that direction, because we do want to teach the child that it is okay to lose sometimes, but also have some patience, because these are somewhat normal things to see, especially in the younger kids.
So this next question is one that I see often in my own practice, and is hard. I think it's one of the hardest issues that I see, and that is about school refusal. Do you have any particular advice on handling school refusal in kids?
I do. I don't know how much time you have, so
we could do a whole episode on it, really.
We definitely could. I'm
putting you on the list. That we're going to come back to that. But go ahead. What do you have for short?
We really could. Well, first, I'm going to try to do it as short as I can. First of all, I think it's important to make a bit of a distinction between mild school refusal and what I call entrenched school refusal. Like the mild school refusal is the kid who largely does attend school, but sometimes there's an issue, and or sometimes spends the day in the nurse's office instead of the class, or gets there late. The entrenched school refusal is the kid who's not been in school at all for a good amount of time. Right? They've been out for weeks, months, sometimes longer. Entrenched school refusal is a huge challenge. It is a very obstinate, intractable, entrenched issue. And that means that making any kind of change is really hard. So because it's such a big challenge, I'm actually going to focus more on the entrenched. I think that's where people really struggle the most. And I'm going to try to be as brief as I can. Number one, I think it's important to try to identify what is driving the school refusal. Saying, I'm stealing this quote that I'm about to say from a colleague, but saying like school phobia or school refusal is a little bit like saying allergy to lasagna, meaning you're not allergic to lasagna, right? You're allergic to some ingredient within the lasagna or the casserole or whatever, right? There's something in there, and identifying that helps to focus your intervention, right? What are you going to do about it? I start that like functional assessment by let's start from a very broad stroke. Are you trying to avoid being in school, or are you trying to approach being at home, for example? Right? That's a meaningful difference. Is there something in school that I don't want to be with, or is there something at home that I do want to be around, like my parent, or my video game, or my bed, or something else? And then drilling down even more specifically into the functions. Now, in terms of intervention for entrenched school refusal, I actually think that working only with the child is unlikely to be successful. I think you do definitely need to involve parents in that, partly because a child who is able to successfully refuse school for so long is usually quite capable of refusing therapy too. It's usually easier. It's frankly easier to refuse therapy than it is to refuse school. And so if you've done it with school, you'll probably do it with treatment too. I suggest a plan that involves a few components in terms of working with the parents, and I'm going to try to lay them out super briefly in bullets, but they really do warrant a bigger conversation. One is, I think you have to determine, what are we working for this week? Like, for some kids, maybe for this week, the goal should just be getting up and getting dressed in the morning. And we shouldn't even be thinking about being in school, because like you haven't been out of bed before 2 p.m. for the past year. And it doesn't even make sense to say like you're going to be in school a full day before we make some progress. For another kid, it's going to be we're going to drive to the school building and sit there for 20 minutes, and then we're going to go home. And for another kid, it's going to be in school for an hour or whatever. So figuring out what are we actually working for this week? Number two, I suggest a rule that says during school hours, the child doesn't have access to things they wouldn't have access to in school. And it's not about punishment. Some of what I'm about to say is going to sound a little harsh and a little punitive. It's not about punishment, but it is about not providing the circumstances that encourage school refusal. And so if that ends up feeling a little harsh, it may be, and it does require firmness on the parent's side, but it's not because of anger. It's not punishment. I'm not mad at the child for school refusal. Most kids with school refusal are refusing school for serious problems like anxiety, depression, etc., not because they just, couldn't be bothered. And so it's not punitive in that sense. But I do think that during school hours, a child really shouldn't have access to what they wouldn't have access to in school. That means TV, it means parental attention, it means foods like that they wouldn't be able to eat, it means computers and things like that. It even means books, don't have them sit around reading their favorite books. Some parents are, even therapists are surprised when I say taking away books. But I love reading. And I know I could happily read all day and not do my work. And so that's just as entertaining in my mind. It's a reward. It's fun. If your kid likes to read, that's awesome. But that just means that they can happily spend their time not going to school and reading. So during school hours, not that. Now, number 3 says that on any day where the expectation that we set, like get up and get dressed or go sit in the parking lot for 10 minutes, whatever it was, when that wasn't met, I recommend the following rule. It's going to sound simple, but it's hard to implement. I recommend that anything with a screen be not accessible to the child for the 24-hour period following that, and then they try again the next day. And if the expectation is met the next day, then it comes back, and just day by day, every day where it was met is followed by 24 hours with screens, not during school hours, because that would violate point number 2, but and every day that it wasn't met is followed by 24 hours without. And I can tell you that when I say this to parents, they often say to me, yeah, we do that. And I also can tell you that I don't know what the rating is for your show, so I'm going to say bull. 90% of the time it's not accurate, because when they say that to me, yeah, we do that, I say, wait, so your kid hasn't been in school for a year. Are you telling me they haven't seen a screen for a year? And almost always the answer is, well, no, not quite, because, yeah, we took away their phone, but they also have an iPad and a laptop and an Xbox and a Nintendo Switch, and we all watch movies together in the evening. That's 20 different screens, and no. When I say it, I mean it really, really, for that 24-hour period. Maybe the only exception I would consider is doing actual schoolwork, on a computer with parental supervision. That was point number whatever. I've lost track at this point. I think it was 3. I think it was 3. Point number 4 is easier. That was a hard one, so point number 4 is easier. Don't nag your kid excessively about going to school. It sounds counterintuitive, but if you're telling your kid 30 times a day, you have to go to school, you have to go to school, you're just telling them, I'm super helpless and frustrated. It just looks powerless. And so I would say, don't even mention it more than once a day. On the other hand, point number 5 is get some other people from your environment, from those aunts, uncles, relatives, colleagues, friends, neighbors, to reach out to your kid and say, we're really concerned because you're not going to school. And if there's anything we can do to help, let us know, but it's absolutely imperative that you get back to school. This is important because it sends a clear message that this is not just another parent-child conflict, like you didn't brush your teeth, you didn't make your bed, you didn't clear your dishes. The world doesn't step in to say, hey, I heard you didn't clear your dishes. I'm super concerned. Nobody's going to call you up and say that. If you're not going to school, it should feel different. Point number 6 is the school should be reaching out to the kid continually. Teachers, other people, staff, school, social worker, whoever it is, daily, or as close to daily as possible. And this is partly to combat the loss of identity as a student. When you don't go to school for a year, you don't even see yourself as a student, right? It's I have no connection to school. And so we do that too. Okay, I'm going to add one more point. This is a lot. But I'm going to add another point. Once you get to a point where the expectation for your child is that they at least go into the school building, even if it's not for a full day, but you're going into school, I add point number whatever
7.
At this point. 7, thank you. You're better at this than I am. By this, I mean literally counting. You're better at counting than I am. Point number 7 is have 1 or 2 kids come to your house in the morning to go with your child to the school. This takes a lot of work because you may have to go to their house, bring them to your house, and commit to getting them to school whether or not your kid goes. So you'd have to prepare that. You'd have to communicate with the other parents, obviously, and with the teachers, and all of that. But it is doable. It's hard, but it's doable, and it is super helpful. There are many kids who will be much more likely to go if there's another friend or two right there saying, hey, we're here to go to school with you, than if it's just mom or dad again saying, come on, time to go to school. No, I just pulled the blanket over my head. And so that would be point number 7. I have more to add on this, but I think that's probably enough to get started.
Like I said, I think that's one of the hardest things when families come in. It's really difficult to work through. It takes a lot of time and energy.
Yeah. It takes tremendous time and energy, and no one could do it for a year. No one could do all of that for a year. But if you can do that for a few weeks, you may get some traction. You may get some motion in this problem that is otherwise so stuck.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to answer these couple of questions. And I do think we would love to have you back sometime to talk about school refusal as an entire episode, because it is a big issue. And so, but thank you again for your time.
Well, sure. I'd be happy to do that. And thank you very much for having me again.